In this video, I want to understand what US consumers can expect to happen if Trump tariffs will remain in place. And there's no better product to explore this topic than toys. The toys industry is very dependent on China. Over 80% of all toys sold in the US are manufactured in China. As it stands now, toys imported from China face a whopping 145% tariff in 2025. Before that, it was around 20%. So that's a 125% increase. For instance, take Sonic the Hedgehog figurine sold at Walmart for $26. The price likely does not reflect the new tariff rate, since Walmart imported this toy before. Depending on the tariff base for this toy, the applied tariff on Sonic the Hedgehog can increase the total price by double-digit percentage. This would price out many consumers and make this product unsellable. Plus, it's very rare for the entire cost of a tariff to make its way into the retail price. Still, if tariffs remain in place, it is unavoidable for the price of this small toy to go up. The situation around tariffs remains fluid day by day.
Quote, I'm going to quote what you said, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30.
Yeah.
And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. Are you saying that your tariffs will cause some prices to go up?
No, I think the tariffs are going to be great for us because it's going to make us rich.
But you said some dolls are going to cost more. Isn't that an acknowledgement that some prices will go up?
I don't think a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old needs to have 30 dolls. I think they can have 3 dolls or 4 dolls.
US consumers are yet to see tariffs affect their wallets. If negotiations between Trump and China succeed, things will go back to normal fast. But if negotiations drag on, the damage would become visible at some point. Let's see what that will look like. First, how did we get here that 80% of all toy manufacturing is happening in China? Well, the US companies have been always eager to outsource their production overseas, and China's toy manufacturing growth takes its roots in the late 1970s. Deng Xiaoping proclaimed that China was opening up to the rest of the world. With abundant cheap labor and high poverty rates, China was primed to lead the way. Cheap labor is key for toy manufacturing. According to the Toy Association paper, design for toy products changes often. Hence, there's little automation in toy production. On top of it, toys need manual assembly, decoration and packaging. All this is a labor-intensive process. Since the 1980s, Chinese toy factories have gained substantial experience and volume. With massive economies of scale, other countries could not compete with China-made low-cost toys. The result? Other non-Chinese manufacturers of toys flopped and vanished. But what about today? China's average wage in the manufacturing sector more than doubled over the last 10 years or so. As it stands now, China's average wages are much higher compared to some of its Asian neighbors. On top of it, China is feeling the crunch of labor shortages. Its one-child policy of the 1980s is backfiring. If we look at toy companies like Hasbro or Mattel, they don't necessarily produce toys for themselves. Instead, they subcontract factories around the world to produce products for them. Mattel and Hasbro design toys, and then they pass those specs to factories in China or other countries. After the product is manufactured, Hasbro and Mattel take hold of those toys, and then they pass them to retailers. In fact, Amazon, Walmart, and Target account for roughly 50%, if not more, of the sales of all toys in the US. At some point, toy companies saw risks of heavy reliance on China to source their products, and hence the gradual shift began. Currently, for instance, Mattel and Hasbro source less than 50% of their toys from China, and both companies have plans to reduce their reliance on China even more. But what about other smaller players in the toy industry? Well, the picture is not so rosy. In fact, they rely on China heavily and sometimes exclusively to source their toy products. It's very unlikely that the toy manufacturing will shift to the US. It's just not profitable and costly. Automation in toy manufacturing is scarce, and US labor is very expensive. Also, not everyone in the US even wants to do this type of work. For this reason, toy companies are looking elsewhere, and the potential candidates are Vietnam, Indonesia, and maybe India. Personally, I track the stock of a public company called Jakks Pacific. It's a toy company behind products like The Simpsons, Sonic, and Moana. On the recent earnings calls, Jakks Pacific noted an ironic situation. Often, the companies that set up toy shops outside of China are the same Chinese manufacturers. And that's because they have the necessary expertise in toy manufacturing. So what does it all mean for the US consumer? Well, the first response from US retailers and toy companies was to pause toy shipments. The thing is that tariff on goods must be paid to the US government upon their entry into the US. In other words, tariffs get collected even before a product is sold. And with a 125% tariff hike, very few retailers and companies have money or desire to pay such hefty sums of money. For instance, suppose that Sonic toy costs $15 to manufacture in China. Add to that any transportation and insurance costs. These are hypothetical numbers that form the base of the tariff. If a tariff rate is 145%, it gets applied on $17. If you add up tariffs, other custom duties, risk, and overhead expenses, you will have a so-called landed cost for a product. Essentially, landed cost is the total cost of a product once it arrives to a buyer located in the US. And it accounts for all related costs beyond the initial production cost. So landed cost is the price that many foreign suppliers compete on when they try to sell their product to the US customers. Tariffs on China-made goods increase landed costs. At some point, it may become attractive for US companies to source products from other countries. Or in the best case scenario for Trump, some of that production may shift to the US. But this comes at the expense of higher prices for the US consumers. Unfortunately for toys, barely any production will shift to the US. And with shipments of toys on pause from China, the next thing will be empty shelves. That means shortages a la COVID-19 scenario. Nobody will import Sonic the Hedgehog only to pay an extra 125% tariff. The price would be too high for a US consumer to stomach. The goods will idle on the shelves only to tie up a valuable working capital of retailers. If tariffs remain in place, the price of toys will inevitably go up by the end of the year. Tariffs will act like a consumption tax, and there'll be no magic wallet to pay for this predicament other than that of a US consumer. But by how much toy prices will go up is a different and a more complicated question to answer. The thing is that usually not all of the tariff costs get passed down to the consumer. There's usually a negotiating process between all involved parties before the dust settles. For instance, Hasbro, Mattel, and Jakks Pacific will ask Chinese manufacturers to share in the tariff cost. Also, exchange rates come into play too. If Chinese currency depreciates relative to the US dollar, this may absorb some of the tariff. Also, don't forget retail giants like Walmart, Target, and Amazon. They will bargain hard with toy companies to keep a lead on prices. So even though a tariff on toys is 125% higher in 2025, its effect on toy inflation is uncertain at this point. Almost for sure, the toy inflation will not be 125%. But make no mistake, the toy inflation and prices will go up by at least double digits by the end of the year if tariffs remain in place. Toy is a discretionary product, meaning consumers' lives don't depend on it, as is the case for food or shelter. So toy companies will tread price hikes carefully. Still, many parents will want their children to have playtime, so there's a balancing act to figure out. Toy companies will try to counter higher tariffs by bringing manufacturing costs down. They may use less materials or focus on lower priced products. This means that US consumers can say goodbye to huge dollhouses and other big playsets. The cost of these large toy products will be too high with tariffs for US consumers to pay. With time, there's some potential for further shift of toy production out of China, but that process is complicated and slow. Of course, few people believe that the 145% tariff on China will stay in place. It's a tactic of Trump to force China to the negotiating table. Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal recently reported that China is getting closer to trade talks. That's one of the reasons the US stock market is recovering. Before 2020, China's share in the US imports was hovering around 25%. But after Trump slapped tariffs on China in his first term, this number came down to 15%. Some of that production got shifted to other countries like Vietnam. So, in a sense, China has a somewhat better bargaining position now than back then. Still, many manufacturing jobs are at stake for China. There were reports of Chinese factories with a focus on US exports closing doors. Steady employment is crucial for the Chinese Communist Party. Otherwise, social unrest becomes a big headache for them. In conclusion, substitute toys for any other product made in China, and we get the picture. Although with toys, the situation is a bit more extreme given how many of them are made in China. True, tariffs under Trump's first term did not cause any pervasive inflation in the US. But this time the tariff hike is on a whole new different level. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to my channel for more insightful content on investing and other economic topics. With that, I will see you next time and all the best.